right, so we're going to actually backtrack to the 1940s. So during World War II, what happened to this territory, which at that time was called Indochina? Okay, so it was a colony of the French, and then during World War II, the Japanese are going to take over, right? So remember, the Japanese are going to use the Tripartite Pact as an excuse to be able to attack all of the enemies of Germany, including British colonies and French colonies. So the Japanese are going to take over Indochina, and they will occupy it during the war. When the war is over, just like they did the Philippines. When the war is over, the French want to retain control of Indochina. But during the war, this group of Vietnamese nationalists had fought back against the Japanese. So the Japanese never, in any of the places they conquered, were able to enjoy like peaceful territory holdings. That didn't happen anywhere. In China, in the Philippines, in Indochina, everywhere that the Japanese are colonizing, the like local people, the people who have been sort of conquered, they're fighting back. And so during World War II, the biggest group that's fighting back against the Japanese is a group led by this really young guy. His name is, well, he will come to be known as Ho Chi Minh. And so Ho Chi Minh had studied in China. He had worked alongside Mao, who will eventually become the communist leader of all of China. He had learned different tactics that the Chinese used against the Japanese, and he took them to Vietnam and encouraged the Vietnamese to use them against the Japanese. And so when the French come back after World War II, expecting to like retain control of this colonial, this colonial territory, they're in for a rude awakening because these Vietnamese nationalists are uninterested in going back to being a colonial possession. They got rid of the Japanese, and now they want to be independent. So the French appeal to the United States. They say, hey, U.S., you got to help us. We've got this rebellion going on. They're fighting us. We need your help to, you're our ally. Help us to keep this colony. And the U.S. is like, colonialism is totally 2.5 years ago, right? Like, we gave up our last colonial possession yesterday. So we're not interested in helping you keep your colonies. So we don't give any significant support to the French as they fight off this sort of rebellion of Vietnamese nationalists. The French suffered this really embarrassing defeat at this place called Dien Bien Phu. And anyway, they leave. So now we got to figure out what are we going to do next, right? There's this territory that used to be a colony, and then it was conquered by the Japanese, and now it's independent, but they don't have any infrastructure. They don't have any stable government to take over. What do we do? So the United Nations, which itself is brand new, decides, you know what works so well in Korea? Let's try dividing the country into two pieces. We're going to divide this time at the 17th parallel. So we're going to divide the 17th parallel. And let's give them a couple of years to build their infrastructure. And then in 2 years, we'll have an election. And all of Vietnam will be reunited under some government. We're not sure which one it's going to be, but we're under some government. And then they'll be unified. And then we'll all be happy, be a democracy. Right? Do you guys remember how well that worked in Korea? So what happens then is we see Vietnam divided in half, and so northern Vietnam is where Ho Chi Minh lives, and he's going to have this large following. He's very charismatic. He inspires almost sort of like religious fervor among his supporters, and they're going to very quickly build up not only their ideology, but also like the northern part of Vietnam itself. Then in South Vietnam, we're going to see Vietnamese nationalists but who disagree with communism for a variety of reasons. Either they have personal disagreements with Ho Chi Minh himself, or they think that communism is going to make them a puppet of the Chinese, or they feel like the United States would be a better ally than the Soviets because of whatever experience they've. Anyway, for whatever reason in the South, there is a sort of anti-communist sentiment. And the U.S. is all about those elections until it turns out that probably the result of the elections is going to be the communists are going to win. We can't have that. Our entire foreign policy of this era is predicated on the idea of, one word, containment, right? Not allowing communism to spread. If we allow the government of Vietnam to become a communist government, we are allowing communism to spread, and it gets worse. Because in the early 1950s, the early 1960s, our State Department develops this theory that they call the domino theory. And what happens if you stack up a whole bunch of dominoes and then you accidentally tap one and it falls over? They all fall down, right? It's terrible and it's catastrophic if you're trying to make it not happen, and you're like, no, stop, and you can't stop it. And there's this theory that if we allow Vietnam to follow the communists, remember, what did George Kennan say? First of all, what did George Kennan write? George Kennan wrote the It wasn't short. The long telegram, right? So Kennan writes the long telegram. You're welcome. Kennan writes the long telegram. What does he tell us? The Russians, the communists, they're going to go at the fringes of society. They're going to go to these third world countries, these colonial possessions, and they're going to try to find weaknesses. And if they find one, what are they going to do? They're going to exploit it, and they're going to try to spread even more. So the domino theory seems like it's going to ring true. It seems like if Vietnam falls to communism, oh my gosh, it's going to be Laos and Cambodia. And did you forget that China is already communist? That's a whole bunch of red on the map. China and Russia together is kind of frightening looking. And then, who else is going to fall to communism? So the U.S. then decides that the country of Vietnam isn't ready for their elections yet. We're going to have this divided country for a little while longer. And in that time, we're going to try to figure out what to do. So it's in this sort of, amongst this backdrop, that the United States finds itself supporting the government of South Vietnam, which is called the Republic of Vietnam. And so in South Vietnam, the government, the president is this guy named Diem. And he is not a good guy. So first of all, he's Catholic, and I've told you before, I'm Catholic, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But in a country that is almost exclusively Buddhist, it's a little bit weird to have the president be Catholic and the rest of the country is all Buddhist. That's interesting. And also, he's just subjectively corrupt. So he appoints his family members to all kinds of really high positions of power. And then he absolutely abuses his power. He creates his own private police force. He takes all kinds of political prisoners. Anyone who speaks out against him is going to get thrown in jail and probably tortured. He persecutes Buddhist monasteries in general, so destroys their monasteries and arrests a whole bunch of Buddhist monks when they try to speak out against that kind of thing. Anyway, he's just really not a good guy. And the U.S., it's possible that we had nefarious purposes, but mostly all the documents suggest that we were really just kind of clueless. What? Something bad is happening in Vietnam? I don't know. It doesn't sound bad to me. He's not a communist. That sounds pretty good. And so it was like we had no idea how much dissent was building up in South Vietnam under the rule of Diem. Because when we meet with him, he's like, yeah, everything's great. We're totally not communists. Are we cool? And we're like, absolutely. We don't want you to be communists. So that's great. We create this organization called SEATO. That's the S, South, E, East, A, Asian Treaty Organization. Kind of like NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And SEATO is an organization made up of a whole bunch of countries in Southeast Asia, which makes sense since it's called the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, but also the U.S., which doesn't make sense, but we're there. Your favorite Southeast Asian country, the United States. So we're going to create SEATO. So, we're all in. We're like, absolutely, you're totally not communist. We love you. And then all of a sudden, dissent becomes very public. And one of the biggest sort of catalysts of this kind of sudden awakening of Americans realizing that not all is well in South Vietnam is this picture. And the story behind this picture is kind of interesting. So the photographer, who worked for Time magazine, I think, but maybe it was Newsweek. The photographer is in South Vietnam, and he gets a phone, kind of waiting for things to happen. There's not a whole lot going on. He's not a famous photographer at the time. He gets a phone call from someone he doesn't know, and he's told, be at this certain intersection at this certain time. And he's like, they won't give any more information, and kind of hang up. And so he gets his equipment, and he shows up, and when he gets there, you can see there's all of these monks in the background. These monks actually are circling this intersection. They're completely, they've completely closed it in, so that nobody can get in. Mostly nobody can stop what's happening. But they see the guy who's there, and they usher him into the circle, and kind of bring him to the edge so that he can see what's going on. And then as soon as he arrives, the monk in the middle, who was very well respected, douses himself in gasoline, lights a match, and sets himself on fire. This is called self-immolation. So this is a form of public protest. He's not being, he did this to himself. He's not being tortured. Anyway, you get the point. So, and he sits there, you can see, he just sits down very peacefully, and obviously dies. And you understand this has to be incredibly painful, and it's hard to look at the screen for very long, at least for me, to look at this picture. So this image comes out, in all of these major newspapers, these news publications, and the American people kind of go, whoa, what could possibly be so bad that you'd rather light yourself on fire? Really. And so then, more information comes out about sort of the brutality of the Diem regime. And the U.S. government had kind of been getting whispers. So within about 6 months, Diem has been assassinated along with his brother. Probably the CIA did it, although that's not official. But it's all the hallmarks of a CIA job. Everybody publicly speculates that the CIA assassinates Diem and his brother. But the thing is, it's a little bit too late. Because although it is true that the majority of the people in South Vietnam do not want to be communists, they do not want Ho Chi Minh as their leader, they do not want to be joined with North Vietnam under communist rule, at this point, after several years of President Diem, do they trust the U.S.? The U.S. has lost a lot of credibility because it took us way too long to figure out that Diem was a bad guy. Because to be honest, mostly what we were concerned with was he was not communist, right? Remember how it all went chaotic after Wilson tried to fix that whole Mexico situation? We were trying to find a good leader, and we ended up just like screwing the whole thing up because we destabilized the whole thing. There was a little bit of a fear, even once we began to figure out that Diem was a bad guy, there was a little bit of a fear that if we try to get rid of him, that maybe it'll be worse. Maybe if we try to get rid of him, the communists will take advantage of the vacuum of power and it'll get worse. So there was a little bit of hesitancy of what we're supposed to do, but in the end, what we did wasn't the right thing. I don't know what the right thing would have been, but this wasn't the right thing because South Vietnam really loses a lot of trust in the United States. So the U.S., all through the 50s and 60s, the U.S. is sending advisors. So South Vietnam is feeling very vulnerable. North Vietnam is being supported by the Chinese and to a lesser extent the Russians. They're getting all kinds of money and equipment, and it's a big propaganda thing to say that Vietnam might be communist or whatever. And so the South Vietnam is feeling very vulnerable, so they appeal to the U.S. for help. And the U.S. obliges. We send them money, we send them military equipment, and we send lots and lots of advisors, not troops in the beginning, but lots of advisors, right? So a few special operations forces, that was all secret until later. But lots of advisors, military advisors who give them suggestions on how to improve their security or to suggest strategies or to help them to shore up their procedures, that kind of thing. Lots of advisors. But in August of 1964, something happens called the Gulf of Tonkin incident. So the Gulf of Tonkin is here, and I don't know if you remember from the map at the beginning, this is Vietnam, right? This is Vietnam. So if this is the Gulf of Tonkin, which part of Vietnam is this? Good job, you can read the map. North Vietnam. So the U.S. Ship, something Maddox, is sailing around in the Gulf of Tonkin off the coast of North Vietnam. This is very clearly not international waters. It is definitely North Vietnamese waters. Let's keep that in mind. We're sailing around, and we might have been attacked. And we'll pick up the story there tomorrow.